Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. Today we are joined by author Sommer Rae. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Summer. We're so excited to talk with you. And my co-hosts Will and Nathan should be hopping on soon. And Carrie is not able to join us today. He's busy with some other stuff. He's prepping for a Comic-Con that he'll be working at, so that's exciting. But thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. I'm excited to talk about your latest project and just dive into your writing and hear all about your career so far.
Yeah, oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited, and I really hope that we all get to learn a whole lot of fun stuff about each other.
Yes, that'd be awesome. So let's dive in first. Tell us about your most recent project that's out on. I know you're on Amazon. We were talking just before the podcast, as am I. And for everyone listening, the link to Summer's stuff will be in the podcast description. But tell us about your latest project. What's it about? What's kind of the pitch for it? And let's get everyone excited for it.
Oh, okay. So my newest release is called Righteous Precipice. It came out in
Great
May of
title.
this year. Thank you.
Yeah.
It is, I would call it a almost religious based fantasy, but don't let that scare you away. I decided to rewrite one of my favorite spins on things where God is actually a woman,
Nice.
and
That's awesome.
we learn all about a new version of the creation story, if you will,
Oh,
and you get to follow one of the fallen angels from heaven around in his redemption arc, and you get to see
oh.
meet a lot of interesting characters, and there's a lot of dark things. I do tend to write in that kind of darker genre. I tend to write a lot of traumatic elements in my writing.
Oh,
So everybody definitely needs to keep an eye on those trigger warnings, things like that. I always try
yeah.
to label everything very obviously. So hopefully that'll help. But yeah, I do a lot of with this particular project. I was able to work through a lot of personal stuff myself. So I really enjoyed writing it, and I really hope that everybody who reads it is able to learn something about themselves from it as well.
That's wonderful. That sounds really, really cool. And I love, I have a couple things I want to jump back to of what you said and ask follow-up questions. But the first thing that struck out to me was how you work through personal stuff through writing, which I know that writing can be a really cathartic way to process things. And it's funny because my first book, I analyzed my relationship with religion as a whole. So I'm curious with your book, dealing with trauma and then dealing with this. I love the idea of a reimagining of the creation story and like having God as a woman. Like, kind of, what was some of the stuff that you, or it kind of, what did the book serve as a way to help you process real life stuff?
Yeah, so it was just I was able to process a lot of real life religious trauma actually. And I was also able to process a lot of paternal trauma, things like that. And I was able to kind of write out instances for my characters that weren't necessarily things that I went through, but were things that I felt like I could relate to that kind of pain. And
Totally.
so I felt like it was really cathartic to be able to write those kinds of things. And I found that that's kind of my niche actually.
Oh, very cool. Well, I want to dive into that more. But Summer, this is Will, my co-host. Will, this is Summer. Thanks so much for joining us,
Hello.
Will. It's good to see you. And Will, we were just talking about Summer's new book called Righteous Precipice, right?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Great title. I love that. And so we were diving into that. But um, tell me more about kind of what you wanted to, or tell me more about kind of like the plot in terms of the fantasy element and the reimagining of creation. I'm curious to hear about that and kind of like what world building work you did getting into that story, you know?
Okay, so let's see. Let me see if I can give you my best pitch, okay? So since the fall of the angels and everything, Lucian, who is our Lucifer character,
Nice.
he has been cast out of heaven, and we find out that this is actually a result of a tragic love story
Ooh.
between our god character, Jeheva, and Lucian, our Lucifer character.
Oh.
Whereas instead of Lucifer being her right-hand man, it was more of Lucifer was her lover.
Oh.
Whenever Jehovah created the humans, he got very jealous. And he said that whenever she gave them free will, she made a mistake. And that they were
Oh.
going to end up just tearing themselves apart, essentially. And that remains to be Lucian's stand through the entire story. He does not like free will,
Oh.
and he does not like that humans exist. And
Wow.
so we open the story on the creation story and the fall of the angels and Lucifer, Lucian and his followers. And we come to the point of view of one such of those followers who he was neither on the team nor against the team. He did not say, okay, I'm with Lucian, or okay, I'm with God. He was just like, no, I can't decide. And since he
Uh-huh.
couldn't decide, he got kicked out as well.
Oh.
And so once he is fallen, we kind of come in on him, and he is doing some dirty work for Lucian, and he ends up in Death Valley, California, where
Oh.
he meets our other main character, Reagan, and she has been held captive by
Oh.
her father in the desert.
Ooh.
And he finds this because it is an epicenter of sin. He is researching these epicenters of sin because Lucian wants
Wow.
to take control of these epicenters of sin, and he wants to be able to get all those souls into the underworld and really evil stuff up, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a
so
great premise. That's awesome.
yeah, so he finds her, and it's all about what happens when she can see him, and plot ensues from there.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can I caught some hints of some potential like religious theming or undertones in there somewhere. Uh has that
Just a little.
yeah. Has mythology or religion played a big part in the writing of this book?
Yeah, I would say that the religious mythology played a big part in it. Like I was telling Josh earlier, it was kind of a little bit of that religious trauma aspect that I was able to work through, you know, kind of personally for me. And I just really liked the concept of turning this whole patriarchal, kind of overbearing type of situation on its head, to whereas, okay, well, what if all of this from the beginning started off with a love story, and see where we can go from there. And so that's just kind of where I went, and kind of the spin I took on that.
Yeah. It's a very interesting way to kind of break down a lot of these stories from throughout how to say it, that kind of biblical perspective, since with other types of mythologies you do get a lot of those love stories that are kind of based around the different deities, but it's kind of different when you're looking at that from a form of Christianity, where you're generally you have a deity that's trying to be made as not human as possible, and to really just kind of bring in that humanization. I think it's a very interesting kind of framing for the story.
Yeah, I think a lot of my own personal beliefs kind of come to it, because I don't personally have a what I would call a religion. I would call myself an omnitheist, being I believe many, many different things. You know, of course, we won't get into that.
We can if you want to.
Yeah.
But I really feel like if there is this, you know, this being, and we are made in the light of this being, or this part of the universe or whatever have you.
Mm.
I feel like love and how we interact with people on a day-to-day basis and how we interact with each other and how we treat each other is really our biggest strength and the biggest thing that we can work towards. And so I really wanted to kind of go back to that most basic structure of, humans are meant to love. That's what we're here for.
Mm.
And so I kind of just feel like, what's the purpose of life kind of thing.
Mhm.
That's what I kind of was going for with that, I think.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of an important message when you're that you can really tell when you're kind of anthropomorphizing these like huge concepts, is to kind of break it down into what is important and like how does that relate to the human experience. And I think just from what I've heard, I'm very interested in reading the story here, because that seems like a really interesting way to convey some very complex messaging.
Yeah, and I really hope that I can do that in that way. I'm really hoping that does every writer want to be a famous writer? Of course. But I'm hoping that my writing reaches exactly who it needs to,
Mhm.
whether
Yep.
that's one person, and even if that one person is just me,
Yep.
Yeah.
then I'm happy that I did my job.
Mhm.
But if others can benefit from it and can relate, can um, help process their own emotions through it,
Mhm.
things like that, or if people could use it as inspiration to go through and do their own types of work on themselves through writing or any other type of coping skill that they want to use. Um, I really want to be able to share these pieces of my life with people, so hopefully I can end up helping somebody along the way.
Mhm.
That's a really great thing, because like I've had that too, like as a writer, like where when I first published my first book, I was like, you know what, if this resonates with one person, I'll be happy. Like that's goal accomplished, and I have to remind myself of that, because sometimes I'll log into Amazon KDP and I'll look at my sales or my orders and I'm like, it's not where I want it to be. And
Yeah.
then I'm like, wait, hang on. Like people have said like, okay, this book meant something to them. So like I've created something that has meaning to someone else. Like that should be enough. So, um, kind of as a weird pivot point, like, can you talk a little bit about the self-publishing process and what that's been like for you, and like kind of the pros and cons, and like what advice do you give to people who are looking into doing that for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been helpful for me because I've been able to kind of set the pace for everything, set my own pace for everything and set my own pace with my editing and all of the background work. Whenever I first started this, I didn't think about how much background work there was going to go through with marketing and making your covers and your title art and all this stuff,
Yep.
and all the editing and all the things that comes with it. And so if you can look at it as, oh, if I'm self-publishing, I'm my own manager, right? So I can
Mhm.
set up my own deadlines, and sometimes I still trip myself up and I still set myself up with a with a bad deadline, but
Yeah.
it's all arbitrary, right? We can all change them, whatever. If life hits us a
Yeah.
curveball, we can go with it along the way and do what we need to do. I think that's
Mhm.
probably the best part about it. And usually going through Amazon through KDP, it has actually been very little to no problems for me as far as publishing has gone, and
Yeah.
everything. And anytime I've needed to change something, it's let me
Mhm.
change things. So you can go through and change, if you need to change descriptions, if you need to change, your art or anything like that. It's really easy to change and advertise with. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a really good route to go if you're, especially if you're looking budget wise,
Yeah.
or if you're, even if you're like me, who does this as more of uh, more for like a personal work type thing instead
Mhm.
of necessarily something like a career. Then it's if it's more of a hobby, the little publishing, the the direct publishing allows you to kind of be involved and put yourself out there and be in with all the other big writers without um, you know cannonballing in, so to speak.
Right. No, it's very I've found their system to be very user friendly and very accessible. Like when I was first looking into it, I found myself like actually starting the publishing process, and I was like, oh, I thought I was going to be doing research for days, but I'm almost done. Like this is just so it's very laid out in front of you, and it's a good breakdown, like in terms of how they allocate royalties and profits and how accessible it is. So I love it, because one thing I've run into writing in the fantasy genre is that I've heard a lot of publishers will sometimes want to change or omit certain content choices. So I've liked with Amazon that I can just publish whatever I wanted to do and not have to kind of answer to anyone in terms of what my story has, you know?
Yeah, once it gets approved, it's approved, and they don't care, right?
Exactly. So yeah. What would be the biggest piece of advice you'd give to an aspiring writer, someone who says, "Hey, that's awesome that Summer's published, and I love her books. I want to do something similar." What would you tell them would be like your main piece of advice for a writing career?
Mine would be to uh, write when it's hard.
Ooh,
Uh, where it's easy enough to write whenever you've got all the things set up, you've got the perfect time, everything's quiet, you've got 3 hours to yourself, and you can sit down and you can write 5K, and that would be great.
right.
But that's not always how it's going to happen. Sometimes you're going to have screaming little ones running around, or you're going to be doing appointments, or you're going to have to be juggling a full-time job, because some writers still have to juggle a full-time job as well.
Mhm.
There are a lot of different ways that you can adapt. I know that I work with Google Docs mostly, and I'm
Uh,
able to write from my phone as well as my computer.
that's cool.
So that helps me to be able to kind of be more accessible whenever I'm on the go or if I'm doing other things. So I would just say, yeah, write when it's hard, and write what is hard, right? So
Yeah,
we all have stuff
Mhm.
that we need to work through, and sometimes if you can just write it out on paper, and sometimes that's in a memoir of legitimate things that happened, or sometimes that's in uh, fighting a mythical creature,
yeah,
whatever holds power for you. um, write that, and just don't stop.
that's excellent advice. I love
Yeah.
that.
So, if we can get into your process a little bit, are you more of like a plotter or are you just a pantser?
I
Like,
am
mhm,
I am a sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. uh,
tell me.
I am on ridiculous amounts a planner, but my characters never listen to me. Yeah, I was telling Josh whenever we first started that I have anywhere from like 10 to 15 tabs open all at once of all of my different projects, and I've got one document for notes, I've got one document that I'm writing on, one document with my outline, and I follow through my outline as I go, as I write my stories, or whatever it is I'm trying to plot out. And sometimes I'll end up on a tangent, and I'll end up writing something completely different that's not in the outline whatsoever, and I have to go back through and try to find a spot for it. But
Well,
it's a lot of improv. It's fun being able to adapt, and if you can kind of let your characters lead the way, sometimes it ends up making the story a lot better too.
mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I imagine that's also going to add in a lot of variety when you just kind of uh, let your mind run a little bit wild and with the structure, and get a little bit of frivolity in with all of the order.
Oh yeah, I love being that kind of writer that's gonna, you're gonna be reading something and then it's just gonna smack you in the face. You're gonna be like, what is happening? But in a good way.
Hmm.
That's awesome.
That's kind of like life, though. Is like you can try to set everything up as clearly as you want, and there's always going to be something that just kind of throws a wrench in everything.
Oh, ain't that the truth?
Yep.
So I think kind of bringing back a question that we haven't had on the show in a while. If you went on a road trip with
Yes.
your main character, how do you think you guys would get along very well? Or would you
I
get along at all?
Okay, with my main character. So for this most recent one, my main character is Reagan,
Mhm.
and she is, for all intents and purposes, are we allowed to cuss on the show?
Oh,
Absolutely.
well.
Okay, she's a badass. Um,
Nice.
uh, she she calls the devil a bitch for lack intents purposes. So
I love it.
yeah. So I think her and I would get along very well. I tend to write a lot of my main characters and my heroines into kind of my own personality, kind of how I would handle the situation if I were there. And I feel like I learn a lot about myself from writing these things because I write these characters and I'm like, oh, this is what I would do in this situation. And then I write a character and I think, oh, well, she's pretty badass. Oh, well, maybe that means I'm kind of badass too.
That's awesome.
I think that's kind of a good way of kind of processing our own like thoughts is like when you put a little bit of like anytime you make a character, no matter how much you try to put yourself in or keep yourself out, at least a little bit is going to come through.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the best part though, because I mean, that adds more realism and
Mhm.
humanity to your characters, right?
Yeah.
If they're based off of real people or your own decisions or things like that. I think most of my characters are all based off of real people in my life.
Oh, that's cool.
Mhm.
That's awesome. So I love that you asked that question. Well, that used to be like when back we had like a prepared list of questions. That was our main one of if your main character was on a road trip, what would you do? So I'm glad we brought that back. That's fun. Um,
Yeah.
what are
But
some of your goals as a writer, like for the future? Like, do you have any projects you're currently working on that you're able to talk about, or do you have any like big goals just in general as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I've got three big projects that I'm kind of working on right now.
Nice,
I've got a Hades and Persephone rewrite in the works
nice,
that I am about 65K into right now.
nice.
So it's getting there, and I'm hoping to release that before the end of 2022.
Very cool.
So fingers crossed. Hopefully, I'll be finishing that up in the next couple of weeks, and she'll be about ready to go. And then I've got a Beauty and the Beast tale that I'm
Ooh,
redoing as well,
nice.
and then a memoir that I'm working on,
Ah,
a personal memoir of mine, The Road to Madness and Back Again.
that's a great
that
title. That's
is
awesome.
a really good title.
Yeah,
That's
thank
very
you.
cool.
I spoke with you about how I do a lot of this for like a coping skill and things like that. I have bipolar 1, and I have generalized anxiety disorder as well. And so it's kind of a struggle in my day-to-day life with a lot of my symptoms and things like that. And so I use writing as a main coping skill for those things.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I find that really interesting that you have a Hades and Persephone novel because I have seen like talking about mythical story characters. I have seen that kind of coming up a lot. What specifically about that couple appeals to you? Um,
Well,
just out of curiosity.
they're like the grown-up version of Harley Quinn and the Joker, aren't they? They're like, once you get past and realize that that was just a bunch of toxic BS, you realize they're the real power couple, right? Hades and Persephone are the real power couple, let's be real.
That's awesome.
And I've always been a big fan of Greek mythology. I've always been really into kind of retellings, and I've also always been really big into like fan fiction and
Mhm.
things like that. And that's one of the categories that I would read in fan fiction a lot is Greek mythology. And so there's always a lot of good Hades Persephone stories. And so I don't know if that's very prudent to claim fan fiction on Greek mythology, but
Well, I think fan fiction kind of gets a little bit of a bad name because like that can be a really good way for a lot of artists in general is instead of trying to design your own world or your own characters to build up your skills by doing like fan fiction, fan art, all kinds of different categories where part of that part of the designing process is already done for you and you get to just kind of like flex your muscles and see what you can do creatively within this structure that's already set up. And I think
oh
that's
yeah.
really important for a lot of young artists.
Yeah, I've read some amazing work, some amazing fan fictions. I've seen some amazing fan fictions be bound and printed because people
Oh,
love them so much, And yeah, I mean, what am I doing? I'm rewriting Beauty and the Beast. That's glorified fan fiction for you right there. I'm just taking it a step further. And some people just they either don't want to go that step, or they haven't yet, or they don't, or they will someday. Um, or they're like they said, they're a younger audience, so they're just getting their feet wet, and learning about all
Mhm.
sorts of things. But I do love fan fiction and the fan art community. That's one of the main things that I really would love to be a part of if I were to not necessarily get famous or anything like
Mhm.
that, but I just want to see my characters come to life through other people's eyes. I think that would be so
yeah.
cool to see someone like cosplay one of my characters, or like, or just make a video about them, or even do just drawings of them. I did have,
Mhm.
do you know Sarah DeBont? Josh, she worked with me on some of the collabs that we did earlier this
Oh,
year, and she does some amazing art. And she did some
ooh.
fan art for Righteous Precipice, and it was
Oh,
so
cool.
cool. And I would love to be able to see more.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think that is kind of like when you know as an artist that you made it is when you see the when you have fans that are willing to create something based on your work.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that would be so amazing.
Mhm.
It's an amazingly fulfilling feeling for sure. I know that kind of circling back to what you said with Amazon being so accessible to changes. When I published my second book, I was so excited to publish it, and I had the manuscript all locked and everything, and so I kind of rushed the cover art where I was like, I'll just do my own through their system. It's fine. And I published it and I shared it. And Will, who's an illustrator, was like, hey, Josh, like, I don't know how to tell you this, but like,
Mhm.
your mix of colors is just not visually appealing. So let me mock something up for you. And then he busted out this amazing cover for my
Oh
book.
yeah, that was
Yeah,
cool.
and so that was great because I was able to go through and thankfully remove my bad cover very quickly and easily and put Will's in there instead. So um but no, the cover that I just showed you had something from the book, and seeing Will bring that to life where I was like, oh, this is the thing I described in the book and now I can see it. Like that's such a cool feeling. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's so awesome that you guys were able to pull that off and do that. That's I do like a little bit of a in between. I use their cover kind of format generator, but I create my own image on Canva.
Oh,
So
cool.
that's
Okay.
another free service that you can use that helps with covers and things like that a whole lot, and it works really good.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
I would definitely recommend that to anybody that's needing a program. Canva works really good.
That's great. That's great to know. Very
Yeah.
cool.
So as far as when you are plotting out your stories, like how far in advance, like are any of your books, are you intending to just have them all just standalone novels? Because it sounds like you have a few different ideas you're exploring. Or are you planning on making any type of series or sequels for these?
So my current main project that I'm working on, the Reign of Spirit and Flame, which is the
Mhm.
Hades Persephone rewrite.
Great title again.
It is,
Mhm.
thank you. It is one that I'm working on that I'm so sorry. My train of thought exploded.
Mhm.
You're fine.
Has that ever happened to you? Could you ask the question
Oh,
one more
um, I was asking if you're planning on making any sequels or series out of your existing projects, or are you just planning on trying to do one-off novels and uh, going off onto other ideas?
Right, of course. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm so
Mhm.
anxious.
All right.
So that the one that I'm actually working on right now, the Reign of Spirit and Flame, it has a sequel and maybe a third that
Nice.
Mhm.
might be coming. I'm not sure. As far as I have the plot thoughts written down, we should say, so to speak. Nothing's been
Mhm.
outlined or anything like that. However, my first book that I wrote, Hollow, it's from the Into the Veil series. It is actually a three-part
Nice.
that I did. So it has the first book, the sequel, and then the duology where you could read them both together.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I have a couple of I think I'm going back and forth between standalone and series, seems to
Okay.
be.
So when you are making a series, because you said you like to plan plan out ahead a lot, do you plan the whole series out and then start on the first book, or do you kind of just start on the plan out the first book and then kind of see where that goes from there? Like how far? Mhm.
Yeah, usually I go through the first book and I see where the story takes me. And
Mhm.
if the characters tell me, hey, they've got more to the story here that they want to tell, then sometimes at 3 in the morning, I'll just be opening my notes app on my phone and typing away really aggressively about some idea that I had. And there you go, you've got a sequel, you know?
That's awesome. What was the biggest challenge with writing a sequel? Because I haven't done it yet. I have one of my books ends and it very much sets up a sequel, but I haven't done any outlining or anything about the sequel, and it makes me nervous. Like, what was the biggest challenge that you had to overcome with writing a sequel book and trying to like make it kind of, I guess, match or kind of outdo the first book in terms of stakes and intensity and all that? I'm curious what that process was like for you.
Yeah, so it was definitely one of those things where I kind of wanted to ramp it up a little bit.
Mhm.
So Inferno is the sequel to Hollow, and it does have a little bit more race stakes. We do have a big character death
Mhm.
that we did not have before, and lots of different things that our main characters having to work through as far as personal traumas left over from the actual first book. Because I feel
Oh,
like a
that's
lot of
cool.
authors, fantasy authors, don't address that. They put our characters through all this stuff, and then it's happily ever after. But what happens when they get PTSD?
Yeah, totally, totally.
That's basically the premise for the sequel, is going into, okay, how do I fight a second villain while still recovering from the first?
That's awesome. That's really cool to have that as an element. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was probably the hardest part, was trying to get it all to work together, and make sure all my characters were still happily married together, and
Yeah.
all cohesive. And whenever I introduce new characters, I want to make sure that they fit well into the story, that they don't just seem random and out there.
Yeah. That's
I think
a hard thing to do with introducing new characters because like I'm currently working on writing my first TV show. I've written a couple movies, but I've never done a TV show, and we've kind of been analyzing how to introduce characters later in the show and make them relevant. And it's a big challenge to like make them fit with the existing main cast. So I was curious what some of your advice is on that about introducing new characters in your second book.
Yeah, I would just kind of basically give them a main role in the plot right? You want
Oh,
you
yeah.
want them to come in as a plot device, right? So
Right.
this character is now going to be the person training your main character in combat, or what
Yeah.
have you. This character has a purpose, serves a very large purpose, hopefully, and hopefully it's also one of those characters that if you're introducing just for a later plot device, then it's something that you can build upon and give a lot of depth to, so it's not just looking like a sticky note slapped on top of an outline,
Yeah, for
like
sure. No,
add
that's
add Frank in chapter 3.
yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think it's interesting that you kind of mentioned specifically of maintaining your established couples through that, because I think a lot of artists kind of, or a lot of authors kind of go the easy route with just adding in, oh, we're going to add in a new character. It sounds like a love triangle is going to be perfect for that.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be the big trope that's going right now, is the love triangle, which, I mean, hey, if you like that, then that's totally great.
Yeah.
Um
You're in the
I've
zeitgeist right now.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a Court of Thorns and Roses fan as much as the next girl, so I can't you
Yeah.
can't call me out on that one. But yeah, that was one thing that I did with my first series that I was really happy about, was that I did have an established couple through the first and second book.
Mhm.
um, and they were able to build on that relationship even further,
Yeah.
and kind of focus on that. So I really like that. And whenever I write in the kind of fantasy romance type genre, that's kind of what I like to focus on. I like to focus on more of the romance and the building and the strength of the couple, not so much as some of the spicier stuff that happens sometimes.
Mhm. Oh yeah, it's interesting that you actually mentioned Court of Thorns and Roses, because that's as much as I was trying to make a dismissive joke about the trope, that's one of the few books that I've actually seen where that trope was used incredibly effectively. Um, Spoiler warning for a book series that's been out for what, over a decade now.
Oh yeah, I think we're all caught up, hopefully. Anyone that's on Book Talk knows what's going on.
Anybody who gets who knows what we're referencing is not going to be spoiled on what we're referencing.
Yeah.
Well, what's the spoiler,
But
Will?
oh, there's a love triangle that is introduced in the second book.
Oh, okay.
That is actually used really effectively.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
I haven't
really
read the book. I'm the one person who hasn't. So
yeah, it's definitely one
Mm.
of those that you have to go back and reread the first book after you've read the second, because
Yeah.
you can once you reread it, you're like, oh, I should have noticed that.
oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah, it kind of like it's used really effectively and kind of calls out the audience
Oh,
for a lot of stuff that you just kind of let slide because you're used to specific tropes used in fantasy books.
that's cool. I
Right.
like
And so
that.
you're expecting everything to go a certain way, and then everything is completely reframed in the second book, and it to amazing effect.
Wow.
That's a book
Yeah.
by Stephanie Myers, for anybody listening who
Oh, okay.
has no idea what I'm talking about. A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yeah, loads of wonderful character building in those as well. I mean, I mean, Feyre's character arc alone, but I mean, just everybody in that series is fantastic, and I'm a fan of Reese a whole lot, as much as the next girl. So,
Oh yeah.
but literally everybody, even to the smallest background character, seems to have just so much depth to them, and I really aspire to write to that kind of level.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Well, I think that's a great point to end this podcast. I can't think of any more questions. And Summer, you've given so much great advice and gotten us all. Now we all want to read your new book. What is it? The Precipice. I'm drawing a blank on the first one.
Righteous Precipice.
Righteous Precipice. I love it. I love the concept. I want to know more about okay, Reagan's hanging out with basically Lucifer. What's going to go down? Like, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I love it. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on Nerds and Friends. This has been a great time. And again, to everyone listening, we're going to put a link to Sommer Rae's author profile on Amazon in the podcast description. So check that out. And thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing.
Yeah, thanks so much, you guys. It was so great to talk with you.
Of course.